And since there was no Orange Nation today, we just stole McAllister Monday. We moved McAllister Monday to 4:30. What's going on, Mike?
Not too much, Brian. How are you?
Oh, doing well. I don't know if I'm doing as well as Fran here is doing the last few weeks with all these guys on campus. And we know I love punting, and I love good punting. So this Jimmy Gregg guy seems to be a pretty good get for Fran earlier today.
Yeah, the number one punter in the 2026 recruiting class. I think he averaged about 43 yards a punt last year at the as a junior in high school. So not a lot of high school punters that are averaging over 40 yards a punt, which I think is a good sign. And he's from Morgantown, West Virginia. West Virginia offered, and he still picked Syracuse. So that's always a cool thing when you can stick it to the Mountaineers a little bit. And there were quite a few Mountaineer fans in my mentions after this happened, seemingly having a hard time coping mentally with losing a punter recruit, which was odd to me that they were that angry about it, but they were. So it's almost too bad that they don't get to play each other so that he couldn't do some crazy Riley Dixon fake punting nonsense against West Virginia and Morgantown. That'd be pretty fun.
That would be fun. I mean, for way back in the day, I said this earlier, like Patrick Shadle, Syracuse's kicker in the G-Rob era, was a Morgantown guy, and he was a great kicker. Unfortunately, he was the kicker, when in the G-Rob era, so he didn't really get to take a lot of very important kicks in his career. But cool that this guy's coming here. They'll be burning couches in disappointment tonight in Morgantown. I'd say the main thing that stands out about this to me is not that they got the number one punter. It's more that, like, the special teams last year, and this wasn't Jack Stonehouse's fault, but the special teams was a mess last year. And now you see in this offseason, Fran has changed the special teams coordinator and signed the number one punter. I like that he saw an area that was a grease fire last year, and he made immediate moves to correct it.
And brought in a kicker from the transfer portal as well. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. And the special teams coordinator that they brought in, Brumfeld, he's very highly respected as a special teams coordinator, and I'm not sure Syracuse gets the number one punter in the class without him being on staff. So they might have, it's certainly possible. The recruitment did start before that, but that certainly played a large part in why this happened. And I think it speaks a lot to Fran. We saw this kind of during the season, right? That one week they'd have a major issue, and then the next week that would seem to be cleared up, and maybe something else pops up, and then the week after that seemed to be significantly improved. So one thing I'd noticed from him, among many other things, is that he's very good at identifying a weakness and then quickly working to correct it. He doesn't just sort of let things play out, but he goes all in on trying to fix it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you could tell, especially on the special team stuff, like when they screwed it up multiple times, like all right, one mistake is one thing, right? When it gets screwed up multiple times, he was losing his mind. Like, are you kidding me? Like, we tried to fix this. He just doesn't accept things being screwed up more than once.
No, he didn't accept it when they did the first quad walk, and it wasn't exactly the way he wanted. And he made comments to that point right away, and that just tells you the D in Dart is detailed for a reason, and he is every bit the embodiment of that.
Yeah, it's the first letter in the Dart. You got to get the first letter right before you move on to it. All right, I'm going to butcher this guy's name. Do you know how to say the first name of Syracuse's other verbal this weekend, Mr. Sackey, the linebacker from New Jersey?
I think it's Jameis, but I'm not 100% sure. I think so.
That sounds nicer than any of the ways I tried. That actually sounds like a name. So let's go with Jameis. That I like the ring of that.
Here's the thing. You have a linebacker whose job it is to get into the backfield, whose name is Sackey. I mean, it's perfect. It's like when, you've got a football player named Scott Player. I mean, it's like it just works. Or I don't know that I can't remember if he actually ended up kicking for the Eagles. There was a punter whose last name was Feagles. I mean, sometimes these things they just work out. So when you've got a defensive player whose job it is to get into the backfield, whose last name is Sackey, you're hoping that works out for his namesake. But really talented kid from New Jersey. I think his recruitment was largely under the radar and was just starting to blow up, and had been on Syracuse's radar for a while, and they got him up on an official and were able to seal the deal, I think, before he had a bunch of other Power 4 schools getting in the mix and clouding things a little bit. But yeah, he's a talented kid, very athletic, as most linebacker recruits do coming out of high school, save for Antoine Delorier, who went viral with his pictures. Mm-hmm. But most have to put on some weight and some strength to their frame to fill out a little bit. And that's certainly the case with him. But a lot of upside, a lot of potential there.
Yeah,
no doubt about that.
The Sackey name, it's just it's built in. It's like the opposite of the old pit kicker, Chris Blewett. Like he's got a much better better name when it comes to that. The news from last Friday, it was not altogether unexpected, right? You're hoping for like a last minute switch, but Messiah Hampton, the 4-star wideout from Rochester, picking Oregon and sticking with his original Syracuse recruiter in Ross Douglas. What do you make of how that all went down with Hampton heading to the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you put that much work into a 4-star player who's, kind of, I wouldn't say in your backyard, but backyard adjacent, we'll say, and he's the number one player in your home state, we know how much of a priority that Fran has put on recruiting in New York, and certainly you'd rather have that guy than lose that guy. But here's the bottom line. Syracuse was in the top 7 with Oregon, Miami, Ohio State, and several others, Georgia, Penn State. And Syracuse finished second and got an official visit the weekend he was supposed to go take an official to Ohio State. And he came to Syracuse instead. I think in years past, Syracuse might have made the top 7 as a token, but weren't really in the recruitment. They were really in the recruitment. And I honestly think, this is just my impression of it. No one has told me this specifically, but if Syracuse had been able to keep Ross Douglas for another year, I think Messiah Hampton's here. The fact that they had Ross Douglas last year hurt them in this recruitment because last year he developed that strong relationship with Messiah Hampton. So then when he leaves and goes to Oregon, that relationship's already there. And so that bond that he built while recruiting him to Syracuse ends up biting Syracuse a little bit in this recruitment. But here's the other silver lining to it. There's 6 months till signing day. A lot of things could happen. He could go to Oregon. Oregon could have a great year. And as soon as the season ends, an NFL team could throw a bunch of money at him to say, come be our offensive coordinator, and he leaves. And that's before signing day or maybe shortly after signing day. And Messiah says, you know what, I want to reopen things and take another look at some other options, and Syracuse would be there. So, yeah, tough situation, no doubt, but the fact that Syracuse is in conversations like with Messiah Hampton or like a 5-star wide receiver in Calvin Russell, that tells you how far Syracuse has come, and not only just that they're in the discussions, but that Syracuse fans are legitimately disappointed when they don't get those players.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, it was always just, he's from New York, throw him a little token, if anything. Obviously it stinks when you don't get a guy like that because you're going hard for him. It does tell you, though, it tells you, the reason he went there that you said about Ross Douglas. It tells you that Fran seems on it, right, with who he's hiring assistant-wise for recruiting, that, he had a Ross Douglas or these other guys on his staff that are, I guess, capable of making those relationships with top guys.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I think what we've seen from Fran in terms of his ability to hire assistant coaches is that he's good at identifying coaching talent, just like he's good at identifying on-field talent, and that his relationships and ability to develop relationships is part of the reason why he's able to get some of these highly respected coaches to come to Syracuse. And you think about Douglas, I mean, he was someone that was very highly respected in the NFL that Bill Belichick wanted on staff. And he was able to talk that guy who was in the NFL to leave the NFL and come be at Syracuse. I mean, that's a pretty impressive recruiting job, So it's not just recruiting talent on the field; it's also his ability to recruit coaching talent. And the wide receivers had an outstanding year last year, so clearly Ross Douglas is pretty good at that part of it, in addition to his recruiting acumen. And Yeah, it stinks not getting Messiah Hampton, no doubt. But I think largely when you look at the big picture, you're still seeing positives in terms of the direction of the program and where things are headed.
All right, you mentioned Calvin Russell. He's the 5-star guy the Orange are shooting for, who's committing, in about 2.5, 3 weeks from now. What did I see? He was just down at Miami for another visit. That's where his parents went to school. What are you making of that? Does Syracuse have a shot here, or is this going to be like, okay, you're third or fourth, but it's impossible to pass these Florida schools?
Not impossible, certainly difficult, but Syracuse certainly is one of the schools that has a realistic shot to land his commitment going into the announcement. Now, I ultimately think that LSU and Miami, or at least LSU as of right now, probably out in front a little bit, but there's also 2.5 weeks left, and Fran Brown's, I would imagine, him and the staff are going to be talking to Calvin Russell and or Calvin Russell's family on a daily basis between now and then, so you never know how that's going to work out. The other thing is, Syracuse didn't get an official visit this summer. You might originally look at that and say, well, you're not going to get him when he announces on July 5th. You should have got him up for an official visit. Maybe you could have, made your pitch, etc. The silver lining to that is, if he commits to you without taking an official, that's fantastic, because he's already taken officials to all these other schools. The other part of it is, if he commits to LSU, if he commits to Miami, and he hasn't taken an official there to your school, you can continue that relationship for the next 6 months until National Signing Day, and then try to talk him into coming up and taking a visit right before National Signing Day and flipping him at that point, as opposed to him committing to Syracuse now, and since Miami's right down the road, doesn't have to take an official to go visit Miami and spend a couple of days there, Miami trying to do that exact same thing. So it gives you that option in your back pocket if that's something that Calvin Russell would be open to after he makes his commitment, if it's not the Syracuse. But again, the fact that you're in the discussion for a 5-star wide receiver who visited Syracuse several times between last fall and the spring this year, again, just positive in terms of the direction of the program, and I think it's only a matter of time before they start landing some of these types of players.
Mike McAllister with us here, breaking down another big official visit weekend here for Syracuse. You had 16 total guys, either coming up or still here now. Mike, any of them specifically that you got your eye on is like, oh, okay, they may be close to making a decision here?
Well, I'll give you this. There's 2 players who weren't on that list who actually did visit recently, or visited this weekend, that were, I won't say off the radar, but they were not visitors I was able to report at the time, we'll say. So one is Chase, I think his last name is pronounced Jeter, but it's with a G, who's a defensive back from Virginia. The other is Corday Houston, who's a defensive lineman from Texas. Houston is one I'm keeping an eye on. He's got a very impressive offer list when you start looking. He's got the Texas A&Ms and the Houstons and those types of schools, but was at Syracuse this past weekend, was at California the weekend before. I haven't seen any other official visits scheduled for him, so it wouldn't surprise me if there was some sort of decision in the near future there. That's someone I'm keeping an eye on. And then the tight end from Philly, Carter Bashir, is another one I'm keeping an eye on. Just because he's from Philly, we know that Fran has that connection with New Jersey, but he's also got that connection with the Philly area. And an athletic tight end from Philly where, Syracuse is the big Power 4 offer that he's got. It kind of makes a lot of sense for both sides. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on. Those are kind of the 2 main ones. But then Jude Okaleke from Connecticut, defensive lineman, he visited, and that went extremely well. When I interviewed him, he kept mentioning how Syracuse is like a family. Probably said it about 10 to 15 times during the interview. And Syracuse made a huge impression on him. He was still trying to figure out whether or not he wanted to take another visit this coming weekend, and he had schools like Cincinnati, Boston College, Virginia among those trying to get him on campus. Still was trying to decide whether or not he was going to take that, but is looking at a decision potentially as early as early July. So he's another one that we're keeping an eye on in the near future.
Okay, there's a good name to watch. And I'd say, about half-ish the guys that were here this last weekend or previous verbals that were just, cementing things with their official visit. You look at the four-star guy, Jarius Rogers. He's an edge rusher from Florida. Cameron Wilson, he's an edge rusher from Miami, a three-star guy. I saw them. They were both taking pictures with DN coach Nick Williams on Instagram and all that stuff. Nick's never shy of a photo like that. When you look at those two, the fact that, it's not just four-star guys. It's not that you land the occasional wideout or something. To get a four-star edge rusher, that's not a thing right around here. That's not anything that's happened before around here. What does it say? You got two big-time pass rushers coming in the class.
Not just pass rushers, but pass rushers from Florida.
Right.
That a bunch of other Power 4 schools, including Florida schools, really wanted. When Cameron Wilson committed, a lot of people in the recruiting world thought that he was a lock to go to Florida State. They were the school that were considered the leader for him, and then he comes up and visits for an unofficial and commits, and everyone was like, well, where did that come from? Nobody saw that coming. Everyone kind of thought he was going to go to Florida State. And even after he committed, I think a lot of people said, Florida State really wants him. They'll still end up getting him. And yet here he is, and I know he took an official visit to Nebraska, and there were some rumblings that he was going to flip to Nebraska, but he told me he's fully locked into Syracuse. Jarius Rogers, I think the thought is the same thing. But two talented edge rushers, the more you can have of those in modern football, the better. But that's big time. And that was kind of the biggest thing really missing from the last year's football team was, they had Fidel Diggs, but they didn't really have much in terms of pure pass rushing outside of that. And they got some young guys, King Joseph Edwards, Caden Brown, a couple others I think they think can be that at some point. But you start developing those, and then you start bringing in these young guys that can, contribute right away, but don't have to be relied upon right away, to sort of develop for a year or two and give you that depth and that competition and be the next man up when the other guys move on. That's exactly what Fran Brown is trying to build, and it's clear that from his time in Georgia, he can see how much rushing the passer can have an impact on the rest of your defense.
And we know this. It's great to get skill guys. 7-on-7s, there's a lot of skill guys out there. Not as many guys that go get the quarterback, so to get two of them like that here on the same weekend, a good thing. All right, Mike, last thing for you as we sit here on Monday. What are you expecting to be putting out later this week? What names should we have our eye on that you think will probably be here this upcoming weekend?
Well, that's the biggest question. It's kind of been the biggest mystery weekend of June. When players were announcing kind of in April and May and everything else that they were going to be visiting, that was the weekend where there wasn't a lot of traction. Now, we do know that there's supposed to be a kicker named Shea Barker from Pennsylvania that is supposed to be coming up. So more special team stuff going on. What's interesting is they were supposed to have the number one kicker in the class coming up with the number one punter in the class this past weekend, but that kicker committed to Georgia prior to his Syracuse trip. And so it looks like the Shea Barker kid from Pennsylvania is kind of next man up in the kicking world in terms of the recruitment. So he's potentially coming up this coming weekend. And then the other one that I'm keeping a close eye on is Tadarius Hughes, a defensive back from Florida. He was originally supposed to visit Syracuse a couple weeks ago. He's currently committed to Florida State. And, when I put out the visitor list and I checked with him and said, hey, you still coming up to Syracuse? I think it was for the weekend of the 6th. He said, no, I'm not. I won't be there this weekend. I asked him, have you rescheduled it? Will you be here a different week, or are you not visiting at all? And I got no response. Mm-hmm. And so someone, not me, at 24/7 Sports, I'm guessing probably our Florida State writer, has added June 20th as an official visit date for him to Syracuse. So I'm keeping an eye on that. We'll wait and see later in the week if that becomes an official thing that he's actually coming up here. But it looks like there's the potential that he could come up and visit, and that would make, I believe, the third Florida State commit that would have taken an official visit to Syracuse during the month of June.
All right, we like that. Ruffle the cages down in Tallahassee. That's fun for Syracuse. That's not Mike. That's not normal, right? We're not used to this. We're a year and a half in. I still can't get a full grasp of what's going on here.
I mean, you go from the last, the off season before when you got Ohio State's quarterback and Texas A&M's best pass rusher, and some of the other guys they brought in, to grabbing several 4-stars. This year, you've had a top 25 recruiting class for nearly the entire recruiting cycle. You've got 3, 4 4-stars depending on what service you're looking at in your 2026 recruiting class. Several, all of which several other Power 4 schools, including some that are considered blue blood type programs, want and are after and are actively trying to flip. You got the number 1 punter in the class. I mean, it's different. It's different for me too. Like, I'm not used to texting with 5-star recruits that seriously have a chance of coming to Syracuse. Usually it's, oh yeah, I got a Syracuse offer. Okay, I'll interview him once and then I'll never hear from him again. I texted with Calvin Russell for several months, and that's weird and different. And, honestly, it's a lot of fun covering these things, and it's a shift not only from the mindset of what we do in the media, but I think from fans as well. If you're starting to get into covering recruiting and you see Syracuse commits like Javion Cooper, Cameron Wilson, Jarius Rogers, they're high-profile guys. Even Jackson Gates, who was a defensive back from California who committed really early and is kind of a high 3, borderline 4-star prospect. He's taken visits to other places like Michigan State very recently. Having players of that caliber means even if they're committed to you, they're probably still going to take visits other places. That's what happens. And so that's why you got Florida State commits coming up and visiting Syracuse. When you have coveted prospects, this is what happens. And so it's a shift in terms of Syracuse fans and their mindset and how they view these recruits, and try not to get upset when you see Syracuse commits visiting other places, and ultimately putting your faith that Fran Brown's going to figure it out and make everything work.
Yeah, more fun when you're hanging out with this kind of group and seeing how it goes this way. All right, Mike, always good stuff. We'll be watching throughout the week to see what Fran's got up his sleeves next, but thanks a lot.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right, there he is, our guy Mike McAllister, 24/7 Sports, and yeah, June a lot busier in Mike's world than it used to be. That is for darn sure. All right, we'll take a break. Phone lines open the rest of the way here in this hour, brought to you by William Mattar, 315-437-7644. Give you a ring. Back next, Q Sports Talk, ESPN Radio.